Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for our March Tourette Talk, Developing an Appropriate IEP and or 504 Plan, What Every Parent Needs to Know. My name is Alina Laus Osborne. I'm the program coordinator for NJCTS. I have Tourette's myself. I'm here to moderate the session and answer any questions about NJCTS programs and services. Really quickly, before we get started, I'm just going to share my screen and go over our guidelines and upcoming events. Excuse me. There we go. So if you're comfortable, feel free to keep yourself on camera, but you don't have to if you don't want to, of course. Please stay muted during the presentation portion, but feel free to send thoughts, questions, and comments to the chat, and we'll do our best to address them in the Q&A starting around 7:45. The recording will end at the Q&A session, so feel free to unmute and turn your camera on during that time. Please note that recordings are not posted to the Tourette Talk archive if participants share any personal information during the recorded portion. And our upcoming events, we have our next Community Connections for Adults with Tourette Syndrome in person on Saturday, April 13th from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. And that's going to be at the Bliss Coffee Lounge in Somerville, very close to the NJCTS office. Our next Tourette Talk in April is about disability justice, knowing your rights. That's Thursday, April 25th, 2024 at 7 p.m. The link is not up just yet, but you will be able to find it on njcts.org/calendar/upcoming events once it is up. Same thing for our May Tourette Talk, Body Matters, Supporting Neurological Wellbeing with Good Nutrition. That's going to be Thursday, May 30th. And the Tim Howard Leadership Academy participant and coach applications are still live. You can find that at the NJCTS Academy page. This will all be linked in the chat momentarily. Lastly, our 20th anniversary gala is coming up. It's in October, but it's never too early to get tickets or to get involved. Let me end my screen share. All right, so that will be posted in the chat in a little while. But now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Stacy Greenwald is a special education attorney and partner in Sussin, Greenwald, and Wessler Esquires in Cranberry, New Jersey. She specializes in handling special education matters and offering advocacy in cases involving Division of Developmental Disabilities, guardianship, and estate planning for families of special needs students. Quick disclaimer before I turn the session over. Please note that the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders and its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of the information presented here today. We do not endorse any recommendations or opinion made by any member, presenter, or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. The presenters are providing general information and not any therapy or other health services. Thank you. And with that, Stacy, the session is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am technologically incompetent, so I'm going to try and share my screen, and we'll go from there. While I'm doing that, I do want to tell you that I am a New Jersey attorney, so any information that I'm giving you is going to be New Jersey based. I know that some individuals who are here tonight, Alina, can you see my slide?
Not yet.
Oh boy. Okay. See, I knew this was going to happen. We were good before, and now.
No problem.
Let's see. Give me 1 second.
Messing around.
Screen one.
All right, we can see your slides, but you'll need to change it to presenter mode.
Yeah, you know what? Because it went backwards. So give me 1 second. I apologize.
No problem.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop. I'm going to take care of that. And I'm going to, how do I stop sharing my screen? Let's see. See, it worked before and now we're having.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. I'm going to straighten this out. Hold on. Okay. I apologize, guys. See, I told you I was technologically incompetent.
No problem. If you move your mouse around, I think you should see stop screen
Yep,
share.
got it. Okay, so there's my stop screen. So give me 1 second. Let me pull my whatchamacallit back up. I knew this was going to be a problem. Let's see. Okay, so now I got a slideshow. I apologize, guys. This should work. Okay, now we're going to screen share. And then I'm going to try it again. Did that work?
I can still see the outline and notes. I think if you click, there should be a presenter mode. Oh, there
There
you
you go. Okay, we're good?
Yep.
Yay! Okay, so anyway, as I was saying, and I apologize, I am a New Jersey attorney, so any of the information that I'm going to be giving you is New Jersey based. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is what we're talking about tonight, is a federal law. Each state is left to its own devices to take that federal law and implement it. So while most of the information in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is countrywide, there are some minor differences between states. So I just implore you to, reach out to somebody in your state if you're not in New Jersey. By way of background, my name is Stacy Greenwald. As Alina had told you before, I'm a partner at Sussin Greenwald and Wessler. I have been practicing law for 33 years. My undergraduate degree is in speech and hearing sciences, and I am also a special education teacher by training. I have two special needs kids myself who are now adults. My son actually has Tourette's as well as, other disabilities. So, I live this professionally and personally. My law firm limits our practice to special education and related matters. Tonight, what I would like to do is give you a brief history and overview of the law, and then give you some of the salient areas that have been impacted by recent amendments. We're then going to talk about, IEPs and what you can expect, as well as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and then give you some tips with regard to things that I've found helpful in terms of working with child study teams and school districts. So let's start. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act started actually in 1975 as Public Law 94-142, which was the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act of 1975. The law mandated the role of parents as equal partners for the first time in making educational decisions for their children. And for the first time, it empowered parents to become educational advocates. The law went from the Education for All Children, Handicapped Children's Act to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that IDEA, as we call it for short, has actually been recodified multiple times, the most recent in 2004. So the findings and purposes section of the IDEA is actually very telling in understanding what Congress envisioned in enacting the law, and gives us some idea as to what our roles are in providing services. So it talks about disability being a natural part of the human experience, and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. So everything we do in terms of educating our children is really geared towards participation and contribution, no matter how big or small those contributions are. It talks about improving educational results for children with disabilities, and that being an essential element of our national policy for ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. Note that the language in the law uses ensure rather than aid or help. And I think that's really telling in terms of what Congress envisioned when they codified the IDEA. In 2004, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was modified. And we did some, pretty major modifications that really helped us. It modified the finding regarding high expectations by deleting access to the general curriculum, and it inserted access to the general curriculum in the regular classroom to the maximum extent possible in order to meet developmental goals, challenge expectations that have been established for children. And it also talked about preparing them to lead productive and independent lives, again, to the maximum extent possible. This is a theme that goes on and on. We've had several interpretations of the law and cases that have tried to tell us what the law was meant to provide. In 1985, the case of Board of Education of Parsippany Troy Hills, which was a landmark case that was actually handled by my partner, Ted Sussin, who was one of the first attorneys in this area to practice special education. And he got involved in it because he had a severely disabled son who he needed to advocate for. In Parsippany Troy Hills, it talked about the code, and the New Jersey Administrative Code said that local public school districts must provide each handicapped pupil a special education program and services according to how the pupil can best achieve educational success. This was great language. Unfortunately, that best did not last for very long. The legislature at that time said, "We hereby find and determine that the security and welfare of the state requires that all school-age children be assured the fullest possible opportunity to develop their intellectual capacities." Unfortunately, 6 months after this decision, the law in New Jersey was amended to delete reference to best, and the standard was then to required and mimic what the federal law said, which was appropriate, whatever that meant. Courts have equated this, and the Supreme Court has said this, their language, not mine, that appropriate is the equivalent to a serviceable Chevy. Many cases in the Third Circuit now use the definition of significant and meaningful educational benefit, which again, the courts now equate to the safety of a Volvo and is used to describe this standard. Since then, we now have the case of Andrew F., which was another very important case. And the standard in Andrew F. talks about a program that's appropriately ambitious for each child's circumstance, and that every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. So you see that the language that we're talking about really doesn't give us specifics, but leaves to each court and actually, each district to talk about what that is. When we talk about significant and meaningful, we're talking about two competing concepts. We're talking about the concept of appropriate and the concept of least restrictive environment, because the concept of appropriate is where significant and meaningful progress can take place. The concept of least restrictive environment talks about the environment closest to home where that progress rather than regression or stagnation takes place. And we'll talk about both those concepts a little later. But let's go on and talk about what the IDEA changed in 2004. So it also added a finding that as graduation rates for children with disabilities continue to climb, providing effective transition services to promote successful post-school employment or education is an important measure of accountability. Again, it added education as a post-secondary goal. This had not been there before, which goes to show that a lot of our kids have the capability of going on to post-secondary education, and the Congress now agrees with us as parents that a lot of our kids could do that. It also changed the timing of transition services, because it used to be beginning at age 14, and now it's beginning at age 16. The IDEA 2004 also modified the purpose section to clarify that the purpose of IDEA includes not only preparing children with disabilities, as I said before, for employment and independent living, but also preparation for further education. And colleges are now seeing that as well, because we have seen a whole host of colleges that now have additional supports for individuals with disabilities, because they realize that our kids, while they may learn differently, have the ability to go on and do great things. So we've got colleges that have programs within programs. We've got colleges specifically for individuals with special needs, and we have colleges that just provide extra support in the way of 504 plans. But I'd say that we've come a really long way in allowing children with disabilities to go on to post-secondary education, which is absolutely phenomenal. I always tell people, if you look at some of our greatest thinkers, a lot of them have, special needs. If you look at Shark Tank, I think 4 out of 5 of those individuals either have ADHD or learning disabilities. One of them has severe dyslexia. So, I always, tell my kids, both of whom have language-based learning disabilities, that, your brains work differently, but they work great because they really have, thinking outside that box. So let's talk about what the law talks about. A free, appropriate public education. Every child who meets the law's definition of a child with a disability is entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. As part of FAPE, and we have a lot of acronyms in special education, it says that a child with a disability is entitled to the right to special education, which must be individually designed to meet the unique needs of the child and prepare that child for further education, employment, and independent living. The program must provide for significant and meaningful educational benefit. Individuals with disabilities who are entitled to a FAPE are also entitled to related services. In addition to special education, they're entitled to related services, and this is a broad definition. It's not meant to be all-inclusive. It includes transportation, speech, occupational therapy, counseling. It could be transition services. There are travel training. It really is a broad definition, and it is anything that helps the child benefit from their educational program. That education must be provided in the least restrictive environment. The environment closest to home, where progress rather than regression or stagnation will take place. In New Jersey, the New Jersey Administrative Code at section 6A:14-4.2 says that to the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities shall be educated with their non-disabled peers. Separate classes, separate schooling, or other removal occurs only when the nature or severity of the educational disability is such that education in regular class with the use of appropriate supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. And this 4.2 is then taken in the case of Oberty versus Clementon School District, where the Third Circuit found, again, that there were, unless there are specific reasons not to, the focus should be on trying to educate children with disabilities in that mainstream environment. So we've talked about the concept of appropriate, and we've talked about the concept of least restrictive. There can only be one least restrictive environment, but we can have more than one appropriate placement. So if we've got a placement in a mainstream environment that's appropriate, and then we have another program outside the district, let's say in a special school that's also appropriate, by definition, that least restrictive environment, the environment closest to home, where progress rather than regression or stagnation will take place, has to be that in-district program. But the reverse is true as well. If the in-district program is not appropriate, it can't be the least restrictive. So we like to say that the concept of LRE can't trump an inappropriate program. A child's communication, speech, and social skills all play an important role in determining the appropriateness of the placement, and districts must have a full continuum or wide range of placements available to the student. So let's talk about placement. We talk about the continuum of placement, starting with the appropriate learning environment. We first need to consider, and I use the word consider, placement in the regular education setting first. That doesn't mean that a child has to try every placement on the continuum before we decide what placement is the least restrictive. It just means we need to consider them. So when we talk about considering a placement in the regular education setting, we can provide modifications, which is a change in the type and or amount of work expected of the student. We can also provide accommodations, which is how we change how the student learns and the way they demonstrate what they have learned. We also have mainstream classes with curricular or instructional modifications or special education and instruction. We talk about, in-class resource classes. We talk about assistive technology, teachers' aides, related services, integrated therapies. Consultation services is also on the continuum. In-class resource programs where a special education teacher and a regular education teacher are in the mainstream class together. If that doesn't work, when we talk about placements, we can talk about a pull-out resource center program. Then we talk about a self-contained class, a New Jersey approved private school for students with disabilities. Then we have a non-approved but accredited private school. We then have also home instruction and then residential placements. So this is the continuum in the way the law sees it. But because the least restrictive environment is defined as the environment closest to home where progress rather than regression or stagnation takes place, a child with significant needs, their least restrictive environment may very well be a residential placement, because it might be where that child has the ability to learn, where less restrictive settings might not have the capability. So let's talk about how we find our children eligible: location, identification, and referral. So in New Jersey, child find, and again, this is all codified in the federal law, and each state has their own administrative code. In New Jersey, it's at 6A:14-3.3, and it states that all children between the ages of 3 and 21 who are in need of special education and related services must be located, identified, and referred for evaluation and evaluated. This goes for students who may not be enrolled in public school. Students who are in private school also have a right to be located, identified, and referred, but they don't have the same right to services that a child in a public school has. And that's a whole different discussion for a whole different night. But just know that even if your child is enrolled in a private school, a parochial school, you have a right to ask for an evaluation. So we think a child may have a disability, we refer them to the child study team. And the law says that a direct referral to the child study team must be made when a parent requests an evaluation, when the student is not responding to the interventions through an INRS plan, and when it is clear from the outset that a referral is warranted. Just because the referral is made, however, does not mean that the school district has to evaluate. They're going to sit down and decide whether evaluations are warranted, but a direct referral can be made by in any of these situations. So who can refer? Basically, anybody can refer. Any member of the school staff, including teachers, parents can refer, an outside agency concerned with the welfare of the child. When a child is referred to the child study team and evaluations are conducted, for an initial evaluation, the whole process has to be done in 90 days. Technically, the evals need to be done in 60, and then the school district has an additional 30 to develop the IEP. But for our purposes, there's a 90-day time period within which those evaluations need to be conducted, finalized, and provided to the parents before we sit down and develop the IEP. Very important, and this gets lost a lot. The law says that the student needs to be evaluated in all areas of suspected disability. I find a lot what happens is that a parent refers a child to the child study team, excuse me. And the parent sits down with the child study team, and the child study team does the basics. So we're talking about a social evaluation, a psychological evaluation, and an educational evaluation. But that's not all of the evaluations that can be done. And there are a lot of kids who have other disabilities. For example, a child with Tourette's. We want to make sure that maybe a neurological evaluation is conducted, because having the input from a neurologist is going to be really important. A child who may have speech and language needs, we want to make sure that a speech and language evaluation is done by a speech pathologist, because those areas are going to be very important in deciding whether the child is eligible and what services the child needs. A child who may have OCD or some type of psychiatric disability, anxiety, depression, OCD. Again, having a psychiatric evaluation done is going to be really important. So as parents or as individuals working with students with disabilities, you want to make sure that you test in all areas of suspected disability. And as a parent, you have a right to ask for those evaluations, even if the school is not initially going to do them. You can say, hey, I think my child has ADHD. I would like a neurological done, or I would like a developmental pediatric done. Oftentimes, I find that when a child has a disability that requires a neurological or a psychiatric or even a developmental pediatric, the school district asks the parent to do it privately through their insurance. But you don't have to do that. You can ask for and have the school district provide those evaluations. You have a right to have your own evaluations done. Now, the law says that a school district has to consider your evaluation report, but they do not have to to accept it. So they have to say why they are or are not accepting it, but they don't have to utilize it. But you do have a right to provide it to them and have it considered. So after we do our evaluations, the school district 10 days prior to the eligibility meeting needs to send the reports so that you can review them. And then you're going to sit down in an eligibility meeting, at which time the school district is going to determine whether the child is eligible for special education and related services. At the end of the eligibility meeting, the school district has to send you written notice of the team's determination, which explains your right to agree or disagree and request mediation or a due process hearing. So, who's eligible under the IDEA? There are 13 classification categories, and it is a 3-pronged test. The disabling condition must adversely affect a child's educational performance, creating an educational need. Excuse me. I apologize. Sorry. Of course, I'm going to go into coughing. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm so sorry. When I talk too much, sometimes I start to cough.
It's no problem. We all have that happen, and that is the worst.
Anyway, so the child must have a disability and meet the eligibility criteria in one of 13 categories. The disabling condition must adversely affect the child's educational performance by creating an educational need, and the child must be in need of special education and related services. Prior to the law being recodified, it used to be special education or related services, but now, in order to receive related services, you first need special education. So, what is educational need? Educational need requires that the child show evidence of a need for special ed by an inability to progress in a regular education program. And educational need is not limited to academics. It also includes social skills, toileting, emotional functioning, behaviors. So we have children who academically are at or above grade level, but because they have an inability to attend, or they have behavioral needs that adversely affect their ability to function in a classroom, they still qualify for special education and related services. The IDEA has 13 different categories, which are listed here. I'm not going to read them all, but those are the 13 categories under which a child could be found eligible. So if a child is found eligible, the district will develop an IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, which is the roadmap to special education, and it's specifically designed for your child between the school and the parents, outlining how this child is going to be educated. It's the blueprint for education, and it sets forth what the LEA provides for the child with a disability, together with the goals, academic assessment procedures, and placement. The IEP has to address the academic and functional needs, including non-academic needs related to behavior, social emotional functioning, and life skills. In New Jersey, and again at the federal level, it requires, and in New Jersey it's set forth at 3.7, that at the beginning of each school year, the district has to have in effect an IEP for every student who's receiving special education and related services. As I said before, it's got to address the academic and functional needs, including non-academic needs, behavior, social emotional functioning, and life skills. This is really important. The IEP has to be accessible to each regular education teacher, the special education teacher, the related service providers, and other service providers who are responsible for implementation. I can't tell you how many times, even with my own kids, the gym teacher, the art teacher, the areas where, at least for me, my kids struggled the most, those individuals had no idea that my child had an IEP. So it's very important as parents, and we'll get to this when we talk about tips, is within the first couple of weeks of school, I always reached out to every one of my kids' teachers just to say, hey, I'm Alexis's mom, I'm Jake's mom, my child has an IEP. I want to let you know these are his strengths, these are his weaknesses, and these are the things that you're going to see. And a lot of times, you know, teachers and other professionals in the school would be, I had no idea that he or she was classified. So very important that even though the school district is supposed to be providing this to you know, everybody, you want to make sure that everybody's got a copy as well. What else does the IEP have to do? It has to detail accommodations that the IEP team determines are necessary for measuring the child's achievement and functional performance on statewide and district-wide assessments. Again, we're talking about transition services. It has to set forth the transition services that a child is going to receive, starting with the IEP in effect after the child is 16. Very important. The IEP has to indicate what the school is going to do for the child, not what the child is going to do. So a goal that says Johnny's going to check in with his teacher, you know, every 15 minutes so that she knows that he is paying attention is not an appropriate goal. The appropriate goal would be that the teacher is going to look to maintain that Johnny is on task 80% of the time. Again, the onus is on the school, not on the student. And it has to address all of the child's school-related needs, not just those for which he or she has been referred. This includes behavior that occurs at school. You know, oftentimes our children are classified for, let's say, reading comprehension, but if that child is also struggling in writing, those are things that need to be addressed. If the child has attentional issues, if the child has behavior, if the child has social issues, all of those things need to be addressed in the IEP. So, what does an IEP need to contain? A child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, which includes sorry, how the child's disability affects his or her involvement and progress in the general curriculum, or for a preschool child, how the disability affects his or her participation in appropriate activities. In the PLAF, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, it needs to describe what the pupil can and cannot do and answer the following questions. What does the student most need to be taught? Where should the instruction begin? What learning characteristics of the pupil must be considered? It has to address the social emotional needs, and it must be written in objective and measurable terms. So saying that, you know, Johnny is reading at about the 2nd to 3rd grade level really is not specific enough, because the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance is the starting point for our IEP. And we're going to talk about that roadmap in a second, but we really need to be specific, because we're going to take the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance in reading and math and science and social studies and you know, his emotional well-being and his social well-being, and we're going to take that and we're going to formulate our annual goals. Our annual goals are measurable and they include academic and functional goals designed to meet the child's disability-related needs and enable the child to be involved in and progress in the general curriculum, and it must meet each of the child's other educational needs that result from the child's disability. The goals have to be detailed and apprise parents and special education service providers of the expected level of achievement for each goal. So we don't want to just say Johnny's going to improve. We want to be specific in terms of where he's starting now and where we expect him to be at the end of that 1 year period. For all students, the annual and functional goals have to be measurable, as I said, and apprise you of what is expected at the end of each school year attendant to each goal. Where appropriate, the goals have to be related to the core curriculum content standards through the general ed curriculum, and the goals must include benchmarks or short-term objectives. The short-term objectives are benchmarks related to meeting the student's needs that result from the student's disability, again, and enable them to be involved in and progress in the general ed curriculum, and a description of alternate proficiencies to be achieved by the student to qualify for a state-endorsed diploma. So as the roadmap to special education, we want everything to be specific. If I said to you that today, Johnny is, or I should say I am here, and in a 1 year period, I expect me to be over there, you'd look at me and you'd say, well, what exactly does that mean? Where is here? And where do I expect you to be? Where is there? You wouldn't expect that if you were going from point A to point B. You want to look at your IEP in the same way. So what we want to do is the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That's where we are right now on our map. Today, I am at 1249 South River Road in Cranberry, New Jersey. Very specific. You know exactly where I'm starting. From there, I want to put together my annual goal. At the end of a 1 year period, I expect to be at exit 1 of the New Jersey Turnpike. Again, very specific. I'm here today. In a 1 year period, I'm going to be at exit 1. My short-term objective may very well be, today is March 28th. By April 28th, I expect you to be at exit 8A of the New Jersey Turnpike. Again, very specific. Either I'm at or close to exit 8A, or I'm at exit 9 and I know I'm going in the wrong direction. Very important, because you don't want to wait a year to figure out that your IEP isn't working. And that's why those short-term objectives are very, very important. We also want to talk about the strengths of the student and the concerns of the parent. They need to be put in the IEP, the academic development and functional needs of the student, the results of the evaluations and statewide and district assessments. In the case of a student whose behavior impedes his or her learning, we want to put in strategies, including positive behavioral interventions and supports. We want to talk about the communication needs and whether the student requires assistive devices and technology. The law says that school districts must ensure that assistive tech is available if the student requires it. The IEP is also going to detail any accommodations the IEP team determines are necessary. The prior law, as I said, required the transition to begin at 14, but now we're going to do it at 16. So, members of the IEP team can be excused by agreement. If you've got a child that's in an out-of-district school and it's a complete special education school, you can waive a general education teacher if you so choose. If the meeting deals with the excused member's area, he or she must provide written input to the parent and to the team prior to the meeting. If the parent and the LEA agree, you can change an IEP after the annual IEP meeting, and that can be made via a written document without holding another IEP meeting. We can do that by what's called an amendment, rather than holding a whole other meeting. At the end of the IEP meeting, the parent must be provided with a copy of the IEP or written notes setting forth agreements with respect to the IEP as determined by the IEP team. And I find that a lot of school districts fail to do this. And if an agreement cannot be reached, the child study team must develop the IEP and give it to the parent. Must a parent, this is an important question, must a parent provide consent for the IEP to be implemented? The law says that for an initial IEP, the first one, you have to sign the IEP in order for that IEP to go into effect. Thereafter, you have 15 days to consider the IEP. If after 15 days you don't sign it, even if you object in writing, that IEP goes into effect. The only way to stop that IEP from going into effect is to file for mediation and or due process. Very important. You need to know that. So within that 15 days, you either have to file for mediation or due process or get the district to agree it's a draft. Even though it says draft at the top, unless the district specifically says we're going to keep this in draft form and it's not going to be implemented, you've only got 15 days. So make sure that you're very clear on that. Very, very, very important. So I always tell parents, make sure you save your child's IEPs and all progress reports each year. One of the things that I find is, from year to year, you look and you think your child is making progress. But when you go back and you look at the IEPs and you look at the progress reports and you compare 3 years ago to now, you may find that that child is working on the same goals and objectives, or that child really has not made the progress that you think he or she has, that they're, still reading or writing at the same level. Remember, IEPs must be reviewed at least once a year, and the required meeting is often called the annual review meeting. So that's, pretty much IEPs in a nutshell. Let's talk about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This was designed to prevent any form of discrimination for eligible students with a disability. Parents may request accommodations to level the playing field for eligible students with a disability. So really 504 is looking at equal opportunity. So who's eligible under Section 504? For purposes of 504, a disabled person is one who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. It's about the degree of impairment, not the diagnosis. So what are major life activities? Caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, education. So 504 not only applies to students enrolled within school, but also could be somebody in the workforce and in life in general. I should mention that anyone who has an IEP is by definition 504 eligible, but everybody who's 504 eligible is not necessarily IEP eligible. Because modifications and accommodations are included in the IEP, we don't write a separate 504 document for individuals who are eligible under IDEA. We incorporate those into the IEP itself. So what determines substantial limitation? Does the impairment result in failure or underachievement when compared to same age non-disabled peers? Does the impairment impact a major life activity? Does it last at least 6 months? And will the impairment disappear without any intervention from the school? If the answers to those questions, are such that the child is going to struggle without the 504, they are entitled to reasonable accommodations. So what are some examples of classroom 504 accommodations? Homework assignments and tailoring them. We have a child who has, let's say slow processing speed and has difficulty attending and is easily distracted. Maybe that student only has to do half of the math problems, not 100% of the math problems. Changing a way a test is given, simplifying instructions about assignments, providing a copy of peer notes, supplementing verbal instructions with visual instructions, using behavior management techniques. We can provide oral testing or a tape recorder. We can provide computer-aided instruction, allowing a child to answer orally, providing nursing services to supervise administration of medication. These are all different kinds of accommodations that we can make, but they are not all inclusive. It really depends on the needs of the child. So what if there's a disagreement about what's appropriate? Whether it's a 504 or an IEP, we want to the extent that we can, work out all disagreements through the IEP process or the 504 process. If we can't, however, you as parents do have rights. You can request an independent evaluation. You can request mediation. You can file a complaint with the State Department of Education, request a due process hearing. All of these things are ways to work on a disagreement after you've reached out to the child study team or the 504 committee to see if we could resolve this without going to the next level. So what are your parental rights? You have the right to be considered a full participating member of the IEP team in the planning for your child. You have the right to provide information about your child that can be used in developing interventions, evaluations, and planning of educational programs. You have the right to ensure that written permission is given before any formal evaluations are begun. You have the right to receive written notice prior to any changes in placement for your child. You have the right to access your child's records and have someone available to explain the records if requested. You have the right to a complete evaluation, which includes more than one test or procedure and is completed by trained personnel from various education at our medical areas of expertise. This is really important because oftentimes I find that school districts sometimes do the bare minimum. So if we're going to do an educational evaluation, we want to make sure that we're not just going to give one test. We want to make sure that we're going to be, testing all areas, not just, decoding, but we want to make sure we're looking at comprehension and oral language. Make sure that we're testing in all areas of suspected disability. You have the right to confidentiality of all records about your student. You also have the right to a free and appropriate public education that addresses your child's individual needs. You have the right to request an independent assessment at no cost to yourself if you disagree with the assessments or results of the child study team. You have the right to be involved in the development of your child's IEP. You have the right to receive transportation and other related services necessary for your student to benefit from his or her special education services. You have the right to request mediation and due process if those differences regarding your child's program or services cannot be resolved by other means. So let's talk about some tips, which are going to be really important in terms of how you deal with this. Applies to both 504 and to the IEP. You want to be prepared. Go into the IEP conference knowing what you want. I always tell parents, let's talk about the 10 most important things that you think your child needs to learn this year. And let's talk about and go in with a list of things that you want to request from the child study team. What do you think an appropriate program looks like? Go in with that list and have it in writing so that when you go into the meeting, you're prepared to talk about what you think the IEP should include. In furtherance of that, send a letter in advance of the IEP conference. Tell and broadcast to the child study team, hey, we've got our IEP meeting coming up next week. I've been thinking about this, and Johnny did really well with in-class support. I'd like to see in-class support continue for math. I think resource center replacement for reading and language arts is probably what he needs. I think that I went through and looked at the accommodations and modifications in his current IEP or his 504 plan. And I think that those accommodations and modifications are good, but there are 3 additional accommodations that I'd like to see. I'd like to see him get, extra time on tests. I'd like to see him get copies of notes, and I'd like the teacher to repeat directions. This way, in advance of that meeting, the school district knows exactly what you're looking for and they can consider it. Because oftentimes we go into a meeting, and if for the first time you're discussing things, the school district will often say, well, we need to consider this. We'll get back to you. You don't want that to happen. You want to be able to discuss things in the here and now. Don't be adversarial and don't be afraid to share information. Very, very important. I have a little sign on my desk that somebody got me because my favorite saying is, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And that is absolutely true. If you go in yelling and screaming at the team, they're less likely to give you what you're looking for. That's not to say that you can't be firm in your convictions, but you don't need to be adversarial. And don't be afraid to share information. I can't tell you how many times parents have come to me with this phenomenal outside evaluation. And I've said to them, okay, you're sitting at my office because the school district isn't giving you what you want. Did you share that report? And the parent says no. You've got a wonderful outside evaluation. You've got tutors that you work with. You've got outside individuals that know your child. If those people have put things in writing that are going to be helpful, share that information in advance. The chances are the school district is going to be more likely to give you what you're looking for rather than less likely. Very, very important. And again, I say this because it's very important and I repeat it. From the time you receive a final IEP with which you disagree, you have 15 days to file for mediation or due process to invoke stay put. Otherwise, that IEP goes into effect. Experts. Having outside professionals who either work with your child or you hire to do an evaluation are very, very important when you're trying to convince a district to provide services or a change in program or placement. Very, very, very important, because while you know your child better than anyone, school districts are looking for experts in the field of education to tell them what the child needs rather than the parent. You need to know your rights. Very, very, very important. The parents that get what they need are parents that know special education, that educate themselves, go to things like this and others around the state so that they can go in and talk intelligently and ask for things that are well-founded in the law. So I think I ran over a little bit. It's about 7:54. I was supposed to stop at 7:45. So I'm going to open this up to everybody, and I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and listening to me.
Thanks so much, Stacy. That was great information. We are going to be moving through the questions and answers session now, so we will be stopping the recording. For those viewing the recording at a later date, thank you so much for tuning in.